it's not the first time that you would have seen students protest. In fact, it was on Parliament's very steps that they marched several years ago, demanding that the concerns that they're raising around the education, the higher education sector, be addressed. What do you have to say about the fact that we are still here 6 years later?
Kathy, allow me to join the people you have listed to convey our condolences to the family of Mthokozisi Ntumba, who tragically died completely in a manner that is unacceptable. It is important also to recognize that you are right, that protests have happened, and these matters, we are quite conscious that the department has themselves received it directly through protesters, but also through Parliament in their interaction with their appropriate committees in both the National Assembly and also are quite aware that they have been communicated to all of government effectively. And so, unfortunately, the environment in which we are in, compounded by COVID-19 lockdowns and the effect on the economy and reducing our ability to be effectively responsive, is one of the reasons why we have not been able to do well in this regard. In other words, there's no question that Cabinet yesterday, when it said, as we heard from the Minister today, agreed to adjust to ensure that what the Minister of Finance promised happens, and that it should have happened earlier and quicker, so that we do not come into this year still having problems of that nature. But unfortunately, it has not happened. So there has been a slowness in responsiveness, a slowness in our economic recovery, so that we have sufficient resources, so that we do not have cuts that actually sends us back in a manner that is retrogressive. That instead, that we must be launched on a higher performance in terms of our ability to educate our young people so that we get the result thereof sooner rather than later.
Of course, when one looks at the interventions, a huge chunk of them have been diverted towards NSFAS students. And we know that they're not the only constituency that needs support. We still have the missing middle students that, whose problems are aggravated by the fact that they don't seem to have anywhere to go to find funding. There were recommendations of hybrid funding models to be developed to assist this group of students. That hasn't happened. What is the role of Parliament in terms of ensuring that these issues, which have also been brought before Parliament, because there have been numerous debates held on these issues, that in fact there is follow-through on the recommendations, especially from the work that the department itself has done to try and understand how to best respond to the problem of higher education in this country, or at least the funding of it?
Yes, my understanding, Kathy, as I said earlier on, is that some of these issues have been communicated. In other words, that the quantum of resources necessary to respond to the problem as understood now are such that what has been given has not met that gap. And the explanation we frequently get is the limitations of the availability of these resources. Otherwise, decisions in the past, for example, this is not the first time that you are talking about redirection of resources. Earlier on, when the decision for free education was decided, other areas of education, the production of knowledge producers was taken away in order to meet the requirements of new entrants. And so you created a gap there. And my understanding is a combination of the speed with which we respond to all levels of education, not only the lowest levels and so on, so that when problems arise, we do not take away from important, although expensive, but very strategic resources that must go to producing knowledge resources. People who will replace those who have dominated the environment before, but that with the increase of highly educated, highly skilled personnel is not suffering also because we have had to take away money there in order to meet the most urgent ones, those who are yet to develop into these areas. So Parliament's job is to, as committees do, as they were doing earlier this week, to receive explanations, what has been the problem and so on. And the huge explanation was the shortfall that the department itself does not decide to say this is how much we will take from this amount. They are told this is how much you get. So that's the tension of working together as a collective in a governance system.
Mr. Tsenoli, if there was no money, if there was no money to get it done, why was it ever promised?
No. You see, this is what we assume that it was promised because it was there, that the resources were going to be available so that it happens. We said earlier to you that COVID-19 compounded the crisis that was already existing.
But the inefficiencies around. Sorry to interject, Mr. Tsenoli. The funding problems, the funding problems of institutions of higher learning began before the COVID-19 crisis. They were there before. So, you know, yes, COVID may have exacerbated the shortages, but they existed before. So why was the promise made, and why did, you know, why was it made? Why was the expectation of students of this country or the young people of this country, why was it set up to fail?
In the first place, Kathy, there is a history way even before the current students in the intention to realize the education goals and so on. And so the Constitution even says in its language that everything must be done to realize the goals as established in the Constitution. It is about opening the doors of learning, even if that's not the language used. This must be realized over time. So the promise would arise out of that. Some of it has been very irresponsible, very unstrategic, and ill-informed. And it created the crisis that we are still having to deal with today. So that those who made the decision at the time that they were made, it was not in a manner that could be achieved, given the system that we have been using all along to try and repair the economy and get it to regenerate and reproduce better results so that we have more resources that can be done. There are people who may have made very irresponsible promises that could not be fulfilled, were wrong. What was correct was to say that given the resources that we have, our intention is to support students as we get the resources that we have. To promise it as if it would happen next year, 2 years later, would have been absolutely not in order at all.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time for this interview. The Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Lechesa Tsenoli.